Welcome to this week's edition of Zoo Tours. This time around, I'm going to be doing something very different. My very first countdown video. As a zoo-related page, I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to tell you my top 10 favorite zoos that I've visited throughout the country. A couple of things that I should mention though. This does not include aquariums and theme parks that I've visited. I've been to a total of 22 zoological institutions, but in this case, I'm going to stick with zoos only. Which in this case, I've only been to 14. Also, I am aware that there are better zoos out there than those I'm about to name. So without further ado, these are my top 10 favorite zoos. Last thing, just because I favor the zoo doesn't mean that I measure it in quality. With that important information, let's begin. Number 10. The Cleveland Metroparks Zoo. The zoo opened in 1882, and overall it is still obvious that they've stuck with some of their old-fashioned exhibits, including the in need of renovation Monkey Island, which opened in 1934. Some might say, as an Ohioan, why is this zoo not ranked higher on my list? Well, considering I'm from Cincinnati, I was born to loathe Cleveland in the first place. But after a couple of visits, I can say it's alright. So what do I like about this zoo? First of all, its size. It sits within 182 acres and takes care of over 3,000 animals with 600 species. Even with all this land though, it only has 6 attractions with 7 sub-attractions. Their strongest exhibit is the African Elephant Crossing, an attraction that opened in 2011 and cost the zoo $25 million. It features 2 large elephant yards, of which the elephants can cross within your path. Within the center features a colorful aviary, a meerkat exhibit, and a look at the elephants indoors. Their next strongest attraction is the multi-leveled rainforest exhibit, which features over 10,000 plants and 600 animals from the jungles of Asia, Africa, and the Americas. And this is also interesting. In their Northern Trek exhibit, their beavers share their home with wolves. And right across from them is their bald eagle exhibit, which lives in a completely open-fronted habitat. Those are unique exhibits, but here's what I don't like about the zoo. I'm in love with old-fashioned anything, especially when it comes to zoos. But it doesn't work here in this case. Almost every other exhibit shows its age. Even in some of the largest yards, I'm not a fan of the noticeable chain-link fences. And here's the worst of the zoo. The Primates, Cats, and Aquatics attraction, a near all-indoor building dedicated to small primates, small cats, and various fish. It opened in 1975, and it is obvious that very little has changed since its opening. 99% of its inhabitants live indoors, which is fine, but almost all of the exhibits are complete concrete all around. What's odd is in order to access it, you must first take a very long walk through an elevated boardwalk through thick woods. It's a nice walk, but it's almost not even worth going up. Luckily, the Primates, Cats, and Aquatics has a star attraction, the zoo's gorillas. Their exhibit, however, is nothing to brag about. It is only 2,600 square feet in size, which I believe makes it the smallest outdoor gorilla exhibit in the United States. But luckily, that's about to change. Moving on, we'll go north to number 9. The Milwaukee County Zoo. Many people would agree with me that the zoo shouldn't even be near a top 10 list due to its many flaws. But I have a slight bias. After just 1 year of college living here and quite a few visits, I consider Milwaukee to be my second home. So after many visits, I grew fond of the place and just got back from another recent visit. The zoo's organization opened in 1892 and moved to a larger location in 1961. Here's why zoo fanatics generally do not like the zoo. Many of the exhibits from '61 are still standing today, and the most recent major animal renovation occurred in the early 90s. The Milwaukee County Zoo is 200 acres large and has 3,000 animals and 308 species in its collection. Yes, the zoo is one of the largest in the country, but it seems that 50% of it is uninterrupted woodlands that goes through the middle and around the zoo. There are 9 major attractions and 2 sub-attractions, including 1 major upcoming exhibit. So what do I like about this zoo? I mentioned that I love old-fashioned zoos, and visiting the Milwaukee County Zoo literally feels like you are walking in the 1970s. I'm not just referring to the zoo's use of mock rock and concrete just about everywhere, but its old-fashioned signage, benches, and even their concessions are blasts from the past. The zoo's strongest exhibit is also my all-time favorite birdhouse, the Mahler Family Aviary. It opened in 1962, just 1 year after the zoo's new opening. Even though many renovations have taken place, the building still stands as it almost was. Its most notable habitat, the walk-through aviary, which is only the building's third exhibit, you're taken in by birds of many sizes, flying right past your very eyes. Another amazing area in the zoo is the Asia, South America, and Africa attraction that uses the not-so-common practice of predator and prey setups like this one here. I've already covered the zoo's flaws, so I will continue down the list to number 8, the Pittsburgh Zoo and Aquarium. The city I loathe most, but upon my first visit, it is arguably one of the most memorable places I've ever been to. The zoo opened its doors in 1898 and owns 77 acres. There are 9 main attractions with a few that are a must-see. My first visit to the zoo was in the summer of 2017, and even with a 5-hour drive through the mountains, there's no doubt that I'll be back at the zoo someday. Coming from zoo fanatics, I've heard almost nothing but negative comments when it comes to the Pittsburgh Zoo. I wholeheartedly disagree with almost all of those critics. I believe that this is a fine institution, and here's why. The zoo has a perfect mix of old-fashioned and modern habitats. Some of their exhibits were constructed in the 1980s and are far from being considered outdated. The zoo's strongest exhibit, as many would agree, is their incredible PP&G aquarium. If it were slightly bigger, it could easily pass as a regular city aquarium. Unfortunately, because it was so crowded, I have little footage of this building, but as soon as you walk in, this is your very first view. Another thing that I enjoyed about the zoo is their mix of complex and simplistic exhibits. I'm referring to the very large African savanna, which includes the zoo's largest habitats, and compare it to the very simple Jungle Odyssey, a short and sweet attraction that is very small but includes rare treasures. It is also the zoo's newest big thing. I talk so highly about the Pittsburgh Zoo, but why does it lie at number 8? Well, it just doesn't compare in quality to the zoos that are up next. Going back west is number 7, the Indianapolis Zoo. This zoo holds a special place in my heart. My first visit was in 2010, and it was a very memorable one indeed. Swimming with dolphins can put a zoo at the top of anyone's list. I'll get to why it's not on mine though later on, but first, let's talk about the positives. First of all, this is the zoo I go to whenever it rains in my hometown and when I'm called off work at the same time. This is a perfect institution for a non-zoo fanatic. What do typical zoo guests look for when visiting places like this? Star attractions and star attractions only. That perfectly describes the Indianapolis Zoo. It's divided into 7 attractions that almost specifically focuses on biomes around the world. Oceans, forests, deserts, and plains, with other attractions displaying birds and orangutans. Going back to the idea that the zoo is composed of main attractions, aka well-known animals to the public. As soon as you walk in, you are met with sea lions. Move over to the left, and there are dolphins, next tigers and bears, then birds, and then orangutans once more, and lastly, giraffes, lions, and elephants. And yes, there are dolphin presentations throughout the year. But what happens when during the colder months when no one comes around? Well, during the weekdays, relatively no one will be at the zoo. So when guests show up to the theater, they actually are taken backstage where you can have a show with the dolphins yourself. So for a second time, I was lucky enough to interact with the Indy Zoo dolphins. Overall, this place is very simple, and that's what I love about it. But here's why being simple is a major flaw. The zoo is 64 acres and has a very small species list, with only 300 total species and nearly 4,000 animals, a lot of which are off display. That number could refer to their large number of fish, but within other parts of the zoo, there isn't much. What's great about having less animals in such a small area? It means that nearly every exhibit is quite large and provides more than enough space for every animal. This can also be a negative thing. In these 64 acres, there are 9 main attractions. Seems normal. However, my hometown zoo is also 64 acres small, and it has 25 main attractions. If you were to walk along the zoo's paths without even paying attention to anything, without looking at anything, it would take you less than a half an hour to get you through the entire zoo. Because of that, I had to put the zoo at a lower ranking. But regardless, with it having the world's only underwater dolphin dome and its incredibly unusual orangutan area, the Indianapolis Zoo is a must-see. Agree or disagree based on what I said, see for yourself in my zoo tour episodes. Going back east to one of the most unusual zoos I've ever been to, number 6, the Toledo Zoo and Aquarium. Why is the zoo so unusual to me? I can't really answer that. You would have to see it for yourself. It's probably due to the fact that their attractions, when placed next to each other, are very interesting in random combinations. You walk in and the first thing that you come across are seals and polar bears. Then, within a few steps, you're met with a giant African savanna. There's a walk-through flamingo aviary, something you rarely see in America. Toledo also has a very small area dedicated to just pheasants. And even though it isn't anything special in today's time, the zoo had the country's first ever underwater viewing for hippos. The zoo is placed nearly within the middle of my rankings, so there's really nothing negative about the zoo other than their outdated big cat exhibits. And I noticed that there isn't exactly anything that pops, except for one building in mind, the zoo's aquarium. Like Pittsburgh's aquarium, it could pass as its own city attraction. It's simple, filled with what seems to be a never-ending well mix of freshwater and saltwater tanks. I consider it to be my all-time favorite zoo aquarium. I actually enjoy it more than my local aquarium. Other notable exhibits are their aviary, my second favorite birdhouse, and their reptile house, also my second favorite of its kind. Staying in Ohio, number 5 holds the highest in my heart, the foundation for my zoo inspiration. The Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden. After visiting the zoo for 22 years straight, I could spend hours talking about this place, so I'll try to keep it short. As I said, I like old-fashioned style zoos, and this is an old-fashioned zoo that's just coming around to modernization, which is surprising because it was established in 1873, making it the United States' second ever major zoo. In terms of structure, the zoo doesn't change much, and it never lets go of its history. For example, the zoo's gorilla habitat opened in 1978, and it is currently going through a major renovation. However, they are keeping the 40-year-old yard and are adding an indoor atrium, keeping its history with a modern twist. The zoo does change in other ways. You could visit, come back a couple of days later, and something within the grounds will change. There's also a new major attraction that opens at the zoo every 2 years or so. Whether it be signage updates, new gardens, or newly displayed animals, something is different with every visit. The Indianapolis Zoo and the Cincinnati Zoo are the exact same size, 64 acres. Like I mentioned though, Indy has 9 attractions, but Cincinnati has 25 within such a small space, and there are many notable areas. For starters, their reptile house. What's special about it? Certainly not the attraction itself, but it's actually the country's oldest existing zoo building. It opened with the zoo in 1875 as the Monkey House, and the structure has remained the same ever since. Some other special things that Cincinnati has to offer is their unique nocturnal house, Night Hunters, their Taj Mahal-inspired elephant house that opened in 1906, and the zoo's 2 AZA Best Exhibit awarded areas, World of the Insect and Jungle Trails. Another major thing that makes the zoo a must-see is the amazing Manatee Springs, one of the few zoos in the country to display sea cows for future rehabilitation and release only. One other great thing about this place that you don't see often in zoos is the placement. Almost everywhere you turn, there's an animal in sight. This place technically is my favorite zoo, due to an understanding bias. But why is it not ranked number 1? Some sizes of their enclosures, even for their star attractions, aren't what anyone would call adequate. And to convince you, all I have to show you is their bear exhibits, which were built in the 1930s and weren't changed ever since. Moving on, we're going way out west to number 4, a crown gem to the world. The zoo that's at the top of everyone's list, the world famous San Diego Zoo. To both a typical zoo guest and even zoo fanatics, there are almost no flaws within this zoo. It's a good size, 9 main attractions, and the collection is just too good and too rare to miss. Number 4, why on earth is the San Diego not my number 1 pick? It probably should be, but I'll say it again. It just isn't old-fashioned enough for my taste, and that will never change. Even though many of their attractions are decades old, the San Diego Zoo is still all around modern, which in today's times is obviously as positive as it gets. Sounds odd, but I'll cover this more later in my next picks of why I don't prefer that. People criticize their elephant complex, the Elephant Odyssey. In short, most likely due to the fact that it isn't all immersive and it's basically just covered in sand. Overall, it just doesn't live up to the San Diego Zoo standards, I guess. If this were at any other zoo, it wouldn't be criticized so much. For that, I actually didn't mind it. I really don't have to go into this, but what's amazing about this zoo? Simply putting it, there is just so much that I know it's hard for people to see everything in one day. Despite the zoo being on the smaller side, it doesn't compare to its big name. They never skimp on anything. Even the smallest and the lesser known of their animals get more than enough adequate space. Something many zoos around the US still need to follow. Even when there is an outdated habitat, the San Diego Zoo does a perfect job fixing that too. No matter the area you go, it just seems like it's never ending. It's especially a perfect time to visit for their brand new, highly acclaimed Africa Rocks. There's just too much that the zoo has to offer, and I can't speak on it forever. Its fame should speak for itself, so I'll move on. The next zoo on the list could be a shocker to some. It's another zoo that you might see near the middle of a zoo critic's list. My third favorite zoological garden. The Brookfield Zoo in Chicago. In terms of traveling distance, so far this is the best zoo that is worth the drive. First off, it comes off as quite historical, and remnants of the past are still around today. It opened in 1934 and sits on 216 acres. So after just one trip around its grounds, you are guaranteed to feel exhausted. I almost have no criticisms for this place. The animal layout is very pleasing. There are 20 total attractions, and they are perfectly mixed. One half displays creatures collectively based on the species, such as pinnipeds, pachyderms, and 2 reptile and bird houses. The other half displays animals based on their natural biomes, such as the swamp, the African forest and savanna, along with my all-time favorite zoo exhibit, Tropic World. It's an all-indoor rainforest complex that opened between 1982 and 84. Since then, almost nothing about it has changed other than the collection. A future video of mine will be out next year and it will cover this amazing building. So here's a short review of why I love this exhibit so much. As you enter, you are met with an incredibly large open space. With glances, the back walls appear as if it almost never ends. With further glances, the animals look so small from afar and they come off as quick blurs. Tropic World's main focus is primates, so each of the 3 incredibly large habitats are filled with mock trees that are mostly 80 feet tall. And with them being so close together, the primates could live their entire lives without even touching the ground. More will be seen in my upcoming videos. But all I can say is that the Brookfield Zoo is an absolute must-see for all zoo fanatics. But let's go back to Ohio to my second favorite zoo, the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium. I'd like to consider this my second home zoo, considering it's only an hour and 45 minutes from where I live. I visit the zoo 2 times a year, and I would like to think of it as a rival to my hometown Cincinnati Zoo, but I don't because they're quite different. Some people that I've encountered with, along with many news networks, believe this to be the greatest zoo in the United States, and they're probably correct. The Columbus Zoo opened in 1927, but absolutely nothing about it is outdated. It's not old-fashioned. But what brings me in is its unique use of architecture that fits in with the theming of the areas perfectly. The zoo is divided specifically by geographical regions, covering North America to the Congo to the temperate forests of Asia. There's only 7 attractions, but is placed within 580 acres, making it one of the world's largest zoos. The parking lot alone takes up nearly half of it. Even though many of them are off display, there are over 800 species and 7,000 animals. The collection amount alone could put this zoo at number 1. Unusually, even with all this space and all these animals, it actually doesn't seem like there's a lot of habitats. In this case, that's a good thing, because nearly all of the exhibits are massive and are perfectly adequate for its inhabitants. This includes their polar bear, tiger, and the Savannah exhibit in the newer Heart of Africa, which is over 10 acres alone. You could argue that many of the Columbus Zoo's exhibits are the best in the world. Other must-see attractions in the zoo are their elephant complex, their nocturnal house filled with rare species, a saltwater manatee tank, and the country's greatest bonobo habitat. This zoo is a sure gem. And now it's time for number 1. One that might come as a surprise to some, the St. Louis Zoo. I've had one visit to the zoo in 2012, and I have more memories from this place than I do from my 2015 visit to San Diego. This is the epitome of an old-fashioned zoo that remains both modern and retains its history perfectly. In just 90 acres, there are 6 attractions and 14 sub-attractions, and every single area is very memorable. We'll begin with the wild section. It has polar bears, flamingos, red pandas, and great apes. But the most memorable exhibit is the penguin and puffin coast. This, of course, is not the impressive part, but as you enter, you are met with a cold environment within a small room. It seems that you are in an open night of the Antarctic. The ceiling is a gray dome that attempts to blend in as a true cloudy sky, and I believe that it's somewhat convincing. Below it, however, is something you will only find at a couple of other zoos in the world: penguins. Not just penguins, but cold-weathered penguins in an open-topped environment that come literally face-to-face with guests. You can literally reach out and touch them, and they are placed on either side of the path. If you ever want to get splashed by a penguin, come here. And in the next room is a similar exhibit for free-flying puffins. Also within the wild is arguably the country's greatest orangutan habitat, filled with many climbing opportunities and private spots for the apes. So here's how the zoo retains its history. On the historic hill, you'll find the birdhouse, herpetarium, and the primate house. All 3 buildings were built in the 1920s and are still standing well today. Of course, the individual exhibits have been updated a bit, with the primate house as the exception. All 3 buildings together form the greatest collection of rare animals that I've ever come across, and each design is uniquely pleasing. I encourage you to see it for yourself. Moving over to the zoo's largest area, the river's edge. A very long, windy path that makes guests follow the flow of a river as you pass the star creatures of Africa, Asia, South America, and the Mississippi River. Although things might have changed since my last visit, this is what I saw. Typically done for the smaller species, there are sometimes animals placed in view of the background of closer exhibits. For example, you can see anteaters and capybaras behind bush dogs, sacred ibises in front of black rhinos, dwarf mongooses in front of cheetahs, and more. The zoo has other amazing attractions, like the country's second greatest insectarium, one of the world's rarest collections of hoofstock, and the country's only underwater tunnel viewing for sea lions. If someone were to ask me what zoo is a must-see, St. Louis always comes to mind first. And if you don't want to pay a visit, you don't have to. Admission is free. And that's the list. Thank you so much for following me through it. If you were able to listen this long, tell me if you believe the list should be different, and regardless, tell me your favorite zoos below. Next time, I'll continue on with more zoo tours. So far, following now 5 zoos. So see you then.